When I was a teenager, I went through a time of profound loneliness and despair, which got progressively worse and worse. I felt invisible in the world. It was like I didn't exist. I was just there. And I was so anxious that this place I was in felt like a prison. I felt like I couldn't change my behavior, couldn't change the way I acted around people, and I knew things were only going to get worse, and so I began to fantasize about not being here anymore, and this fantasy got bigger and bigger. The thing is, I didn't actually hate life. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. It's just that I felt incapable of it. Tried to describe this to people over the years, and the image that always comes to my mind is of a chasm. I always picture it like the staircase in the Mines of Moria in the Fellowship of the Ring. It felt like I was on this little platform, and across the chasm from this platform is a staircase which goes up, and I knew if I could just reach the other side, then life could take on an upward spiral. But at that time, in that dark, lonely hole, there was no way of crossing that chasm, hence the fantasies of non-existence. I had no energy for doing anything, I was just stuck. And then, after hitting the rock bottom of this hole, something happened. I started to read. I didn't have any hopes of bridging the chasm, that still seemed uncrossable. But when I was reading books, it just wasn't as much of a problem anymore. Wasn't like video games, which I'd stopped playing then and have never really played since, aside from a bout of Civilization 5 in a very stoned phase during university. There was something different about books, but it wasn't just books, it was the books I was reading. See, the books I was reading were old hero stories. The first I read was The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, and it is still one of my favourite books ever. Fortunately, it was abridged, otherwise I probably never would have finished it or started it. From there, I read whatever old books like this we had lying around the house. Actually, thinking about it now, I have no idea where they came from, because we definitely didn't read them as kids, or at least I didn't, and I can't really remember them before this time. But anyway, we had books like Three Musketeers and Jack London's Call of the Wild and Arthur Conan Doyle's Lost World. They were all of a particular genre. They were all heroes' stories. They were all journeys where the protagonist sets off at the start in a state not too dissimilar to my mental prison. They were weak, ineffectual nothings. They were your typical white knight simp, oscillating between their sense of inferiority and their dreams of grandeur. But through the course of their adventures, things changed, and they rose to the challenges that faced them, and they found friendship and love and admiration. There was something pure in them. As my upward spiral progressed and I discovered philosophy, this phase didn't go away entirely, but instead it morphed into a more classic form, the biography. I read the biographies of Bob Dylan, Benjamin Franklin, and Teddy Roosevelt. And then in university, I was fascinated by ancients like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. And I also remember reading Merezhkovsky's fictionalized biography of Da Vinci that fascinated Freud so much. And this habit hasn't disappeared since university. I've been moved and inspired by biographies of Buddha, Muhammad, Brian Boru, and Elon Musk, a few biographies of Nietzsche and other thinkers like Walt Whitman, Foucault, Marx, and Henry David Thoreau. The thing is, many of these lives had no relevance to mine. I had no intention of being a politician or a military leader, a painter or a musician, but that didn't detract from their effect. What I found in these books was a sense of momentousness, a sense of history. I guess I was intoxicated with the heroic journeys of these larger-than-life characters. What people don't appreciate, and what my university history professor in particular did not appreciate, is there's something happening to us when we read those biographies. It's the same thing that happened to me when reading The Three Musketeers and the other hero stories when I was younger. In fact, there's more similarity between them than you'd think. Many of these larger-than-life figures were really similar to the characters in the books. Musk was known for spacing out and was bullied so bad in South Africa that he almost died when he was kicked down the stairs by bullies as a kid. Teddy Roosevelt was a perpetually sick kid who was bedridden for much of his childhood, and it was in this time that he devoured the stories of heroes. And Napoleon was a reclusive kid who loved to read history as well. The point is that these biographies were a more sophisticated version of the same thing as the hero stories that saved me when I was a teenager. After reading The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt for the second time in university, I can remember an awkward moment when my flatmate walked into the kitchen to find me staring at the wall in a willpower building exercise. I started getting up at 5 in the morning, doing yoga, tai chi, learning Italian, practicing speed reading and analytic reading, and then going back to bed to try and have lucid dreams. Of course, this manic pace of what I was calling my Ubermensch program was destined for failure. Despite what Tony Robbins would have you believe, this isn't how transformation happens. I was soon back wallowing in my own inadequacy. But the point is that these larger-than-life biographies, like these fictional books, have an effect on us. They are archetypal turbines, overcharging us with life, driving us to action. I'm fairly sure that this is what the whole Marvel thing is about, though to be honest, I haven't seen any Marvel movies since the first Iron Man, and the last superhero movie I watched was the third Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. And I know those Batman movies were not about archetypal inspiration any more than Oppenheimer is. They're about the compromises between principles and reality. The hero stories aren't tainted by such contact with mundane truth. As we talked about in the rom-com episode, if you want contact with reality, read some Dostoevsky. The purpose of such pieces of art is categorically different to these books. These books are about giving us life. That's why I loved fantasy and sci-fi books and series, and it's why I'm proud of reading those somewhat cheesy books back in the day. And if you're looking for more evidence than my experience, you can listen to the words of some of these larger-than-life individuals I read about. In Ashley Vance's biography of Elon Musk, he talks about Musk's reading as a kid. He loved science fiction and fantasy, and he even tried his hand at writing some fantasy stories that involved dragon and supernatural beings, saying that he wanted to write something like Lord of the Rings. Ashley Vance writes, "A boy fantasizing about space and battles between good and evil is anything but amazing. A boy who takes these fantasies seriously is more remarkable." Such was the case with the young Elon Musk. By the middle of his teenage years, Musk had blended fantasy and reality to the point that they were hard to separate in his mind. "Maybe I read too many comics as a kid," Musk said. "In the comics, it always seems like they're trying to save the world. It seems like one should try to make the world a better place, because the inverse makes no sense." And if you don't like Musk, then you'll love this next one. Despite what he wanted people to think, Adolf Hitler's main reading was never Goethe or Fichte, but cowboy stories from the American West, where the good, that is to say the white European guys, always win. Among the 16,000 books of his found after his death, there were over 1,000 well-read novellas of not just these cowboy stories, but also a lot of romance stories. Where others would turn to the Bible in times of trouble, Hitler would turn to the cowboy stories of Karl May. Here's a passage from Andrew Roberts' biography of Napoleon. He was a precocious and prodigious reader, drawn at an early age to history and biography. Napoleon claimed that he first read Jean-Jacques Rousseau's La Nouvelle Heloise, an 800-page novel of love and redemption, the sauciest love story ever written by a philosopher and the best-selling novel of the 18th century, at the age of 9, and said, "It turned my head." The same theme comes up in that Edmund Morris biography of Teddy Roosevelt. He writes that, "As his reading abilities developed and his ill health continued, he turned more and more to stories of outdoor action, in which he could identify with heroes larger than life. The novels of Ballantyne, the sea yarns of Captain Marryat, Cooper's tales of the American frontier. Epic poetry, too, inspired him. Above all, Longfellow's Saga of King Olaf, with its wild warlocks blaring horns and shields shining like suns." And here's Teddy's own description. "I was nervous and timid, yet from reading of the people I admired, ranging from the soldiers of Valley Forge and Morgan's Riflemen to the heroes of my favourite stories, and from hearing of the feats performed by my southern forefathers and kinsfolk, and from knowing my father, I felt a great admiration for men who were fearless and could hold their own in the world, and I had a great desire to be like them." We might also think of Caesar crying at 30 because he hadn't achieved what Alexander the Great had by that age, and of Alexander fawning over Heracles as his icon. Fiction might seem like such a pointless thing to the overly serious reader, and fantasy and sci-fi are often dismissed as the shameful pastime of men in a state of arrested development. But it all just reminds me of that Bob Dylan song, The Ballad of a Thin Man, where he sings about a journalist entering into the strange countercultural scene of the 1960s. Dylan sings, "Something is happening here.
You don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones?"
I suppose it's all reflective of a postmodern society in which all sincerity has to be coated in irony. It's too vulnerable to be earnest. It's cringy. And so, instead of naked emotion, we like to dress up the archetypal passions in more respectable, psychologically shrewd attire. Writers feel the need to justify their nerdy passion by making constant ironic meta-jokes. It takes courage in the postmodern age to write something so nakedly heroic. We live in an era that no longer believes in heroes. Our fantasy is fed to us in the jaded, cynical form of Game of Thrones, and our superheroes have to make meta-ironic commentary on the silliness of the genre, or else, once again, give in to the jaded, cynical form that we find in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. We're all proud of loving Dostoevsky, but we keep our rom-com, sci-fi and fantasy to ourselves as our own dirty little secrets. But without the hope we find in rom-coms, you get incels. And without the dreaming of sci-fi and fantasy, you get the crushing mundanity of our postmodern prison. Remember that these naive, simple, unrealistic hero stories saved me, and I think we should always keep a space for them. As we've seen, such stories have inspired some of the greatest, if not most questionable people in history. While the rest of us are too jaded to dream beyond our prison, those strange souls were called to a bigger game. And even if we don't want to be mass murderers or billionaires, I do believe that most of us should dream bigger than the prison irony and edginess has confined us to. For my own part, I'm grateful for these unrealistic books and genres, because in a moment where it seemed impossible and all seemed lost, they helped me cross a chasm that promised to imprison me for life. That's everything for this episode of The Living Philosophy. I'd like to thank David Pilibosian, Sasha Canthan, and all the other patrons for their support of the channel. If you'd like to get access to book clubs, long-form interviews with creators and experts, monthly Q&As, or if you just want to support the channel and get your name in the credits like these wonderful people, then you can head over to Patreon. As ever, if you have any thoughts, insights, or feedback, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Otherwise, I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching.